So basically, that concept there, which seems something, is actually something simple, from community housing to housing the community. Took me a long time to come with this as a slogan and as a title for the presentation, because I think we have a problem as a community housing sector, including the land trust and so on, in understanding what is exactly we are trying to do and how we are focusing. So most of you will be familiar with that thing. It's, we stole the image from CMHC without paying any rights. And we completely disagree with everything that is written there, including the fact that it's not representative, and usually you should draw a chart to make sure that people illustrate what is difficult to read through numbers and everything. But when you look to that, what they call the continuum of housing, you get an impression that more or less. Will that make a laser beam? Whoop! And I killed the thing. Oh, it's back. So no laser. Anyway, what you get a sense is that from homelessness, basically, to market rental housing, that would represent like 85%, 90% of the chart. The reality is that in Canada, that last little thing on the right-hand side is actually 65% of the housing stock altogether. So you don't have a proper understanding of the reality when you look at that chart. Nevertheless, it happened to be useful for me in my presentation, so I kept the image. And because there's other thing we can do with it instead of just explaining. So, well, that demonstrates pretty much the kind of, it speaks by itself. The further you are on the left-hand side of the chart, the further you need support, because the private market is not providing proper support and proper housing for you to go around. The other angle is that the more you get money, the more you're on the right-hand side. So people who have big needs have little means, and people with big means have little needs. Well, it is true, but it's not as simple as that. Because in our society, if you're looking to how did we come to that answer? And the answer to that situation, the answer is basically, on average in Canada, there's tons of social science people, all much more intelligent and much more scientific than me, who came to the conclusion that on average, one homeless person costs $60,000 per year in healthcare, police services, and so on. So we are willing as a society to spend a lot of money to support homelessness. And I wage my word, support homelessness. It's a business. And we have something else. The federal government recently, 2018, came upon with the idea of having a national housing strategy. Now, when they speak about it, they say it's $100 billion. But in reality, when you look to the number, the strategy might be the $100 billion, but the reality is about $35 billion from the federal government. Everybody else is supposed to chip in, so they say it's $100 billion, but their money is $35 billion. So that one could say it's a lot of money, and most of that money is dedicated. The further you go on the left-hand side of the chart, the more money you actually have dedicated by the federal national side, the federal services. Now, if I was to ask you, what's $1,000 billion? Well, $1,000 billion, or $1 trillion, that's a huge amount of cash. This is, today, the amount of money that is dedicated by the federal government in support of private single ownership, mainly through CMHC, through two different programs. One that is about $500 billion, so we're talking big numbers here. $500 billion in something called the Canada Mortgage Bonds, and $500 billion through the insurance, the Canada CMHC insurance program for home ownership. The reality is that whatever the discourse is, that people say, well, I own my house and I pull myself by my bootstrap and everything. The reality is that without support of the federal government, most Canadians who today own the house would not own a house. They would not be able to own a house. No banks would have lent them the money, and they would be renter or maybe even homeless. Now, another interesting number, 15 billion. Well, that 15 billion is the money that the federal and provincial government across this country decide not to collect through the exemption for capital gain on your main residency. So every year, year after year, there's $15 billion that is distributed to the most wealthy of this society, those who made money out of their house. And the more house you buy and sell, the more you're going to collect of that tax break. Every 3 years, you can sell a house, make a couple of hundreds of thousands of dollars in speculation, pocket it, and keep going. 3 years later, pocket another slide, and pocket another slide, and pocket another slide. And we're all happy about that, it seems, as a society. Now, I mean, might be the right thing to do, I don't know. What's 150 billion? Well, that's to give us ourselves an idea of the impact and the role of the state in managing the housing market. If I was to ask you, what is the single individual largest spending done by the federal government during the COVID pandemic? Probably you would tell me either CERB or the costs of healthcare or something like that. Well, if you look through the federal government budget and the federal government decision at the cabinet level, you'll figure out that there's one spending of $150 billion that was done to support the banking industry to prevent the private for-profit market to collapse. So what they did is that they took $150 billion and they gave it to the bank, saying, you're going to tell us which mortgage is the most riskier in your view, and we're going to pay you back. So even if people stop paying back, you're not going to lose a penny because you've already been refunded. So the individual people don't know that. But from that moment, when they come back to the bank every month paying their mortgage, the mortgage is actually the money is collected by the bank, but sent to CMHC, because now the mortgage belonged to CMHC. So the federal government took a stand and said, we, as government, are going to carry a risk of $150 billion to protect the private home ownership market, because we believe that the market rules by itself better than community housing sector. Well, I'm not so sure about the itself, but certainly they believe it's better. So this is basically how it works in our society today. Now that has consequences. Amongst other consequences is that we're facing a situation where we have a supply deficit. There's a total supply deficit, yes, because there's demographic growth and all of that, but there's a deficit in the supply chain, mainly where we're in the middle. Coincidence? This is where there is no support being provided by the state. So that explains, I mean, in my eyes, there's a kind of relationship between both, both things. So, and that is a large part of the problem we're facing today, because that situation creates a context where, well, on one hand, people that were there, I mean, I'm thinking of myself when I ended being a student, or I was for a long time a minimum wage worker. Now, I could still, with a flatmate, manage to live in an apartment without having to skip too many meals. Today, 2 people on minimum wage can't afford to live, and it was a 3-bedroom apartment. So today, no 2 individuals living with minimum wage can rent a 3-bedroom apartment and make a living, and even sometimes buy a beer. So that is creating a lot of difficulties. Now, people that are there have the choice. Either they go on the left-hand side of the chart and they live housing instability, leading ultimately up to homelessness, or they say, no, we don't want to go into housing instability, so we're going to increase the amount of our income dedicated to housing. So that is costing them a lot of money. And quite often, if they go too far on the right-hand side of the chart, they become broke and have a shortcut towards the left-hand side of the graph on top of it. So that creates a lot of pain for the individual, for the society, it makes people unhappy, even those who survive on the left-hand side of the chart. I don't know who is happy to see all those new, quote-unquote, homeless people that are increasing in number every day in Canada. And how many people are so happy to hear that there's so many people who can't live in proper housing and all of those situations. So it creates a lot of distress. So the answer to that is to develop proper supply. And proper supply would basically fill that gap, and the result will be, well, less distressed people and a more reasonable amount of money being distributed to it. So that's kind of the general spirit between what the center is trying to do and what this presentation is about. So if we do that properly, what we would end up with is a situation where, taking the same chart, that long thing should at least be 20% of the stock, and that should be us. Us, the land trust, the co-op, the not-for-profit. We have to own at least 20%, and just to give you the number, today we are at 3.5% in Canada. So long run to do before we get to that number. So now, how did we get to that situation? It's an interesting presentation, an interesting concept, I believe, to understand the concept of natural right. Long time ago, Francis I, not the current Pope, Francis I, 1515, he was a king of France, and he believed that he had the natural right to own any piece of land that was not already owned by a Christian king. So, and he was seeing those Spaniard and Portuguese people going in Latin America and bringing back tons of golds and going. So he said, no, it makes no sense that they're making tons of money, but we're not collecting anything. I'm not collecting anything as a king. So he hired that guy, Jacques Cartier, who was a sailor and businessman. You all know that, but you'll see there's a connection. I'm not going too far. And he told him, come on, you got to go there and do something. So Cartier get into his boat, sail there, and then on July 24, 1534, Mr. Cartier said, this land belonged to the King of France. And the proof that this land belonged to the King of France is that I'm going to put a cross there. While he write himself in his diary that when he put the cross up, he told to the indigenous people that were there that had no other signification than being a sign to help him navigate and find his way. So this was the first commercial transaction in North America done, maybe not in North America, but certainly in Canada, done by a settler. And that first transaction actually, therefore, was based on a lie. And every other transaction, every single one of them, since that day till today, is based on that lie. That people who were living there, who were custodian of the land, who had a harmonious relation with that land, were stole under the pretense of a lie. They were told this is not what it is, but we decided that our interpretation was the right one, even if we knew it's not a mistake, miscommunication. We lied on purpose. And every transaction since then is based on that first lie. Now, things move. François Ier maybe had some problem, but let's go to see our friend George III. Now, he also had a natural right to own the land, he believed. And he said, yes, well, the King of France is a Christian king, but is not exactly the same kind of Christian as I am, and so on. So therefore, it's not really relevant, his ownership of the thing. So let's go forward and make a couple of war, conquer, battle, and own the land, and issue eventually the royal proclamation. And this is important because now we're getting closer to Canada. This text is part of the Canadian Constitution today. So the lie keeps going on, part of that text. So it set the legal framework that brings us to our Constitution of today, and it basically defined how we would keep conquering that land, but with some rules. Now, this is very interesting also. Well, there's a lot of people who think, the American, I can't avoid doing something that, American people did great thing over the time, I'm sure. But one of the things that they rarely say when they talk about the American Revolution, and it's rarely taught to us when we go to school, is that, no taxation without representation, the Tea Party in Boston, and so on. This is the base why people wanted to do the American Revolution. Well, if you read George Washington's text, he actually wrote that his main preoccupation leading him to involve himself in the American Revolution was the fact that the royal proclamation prevent him to seize the land with no compensation to indigenous people. That was his main interest in getting involved in that war. So again, maybe some golden face need to a little bit of scratch there. Anyway, so if we summarize that, what we know is that a French king believed that he had the natural right to own everything. He was he hired a goon to go and steal the land and then lie to everybody, but then a British goon, a British king, not a goon, well, he was also a goon, but that's a different story. So a British king got there, and his natural right was better, he thought, than the natural right of the French king. So he took over, write that proclamation that's saying, no, I own everything, and all of that end up in a situation where today in Canada, we have hundreds of thousands of people who are homeless every year, and we have a crisis. So, a bit of shortcut, I know. So let's dig a bit deeper. Whose land? Well, no, the first treaty that I'm aware of that have been negotiated in Canada, and not only in Canada, but in North America by indigenous organizations, indigenous people, I should say, and settlers, were actually the two-row wampum. Now, that doesn't say that the land belonged to anyone. It was an agreement on to occupy and use the land. It didn't say it belonged to me. Now, that treaty doesn't exist anymore for all kinds of reasons, including the fact that it was dealt with the Holland, people from Holland. And they were kicked off by another king, so their agreement didn't have any value. I'm not sure if they intend to respect that agreement, but in any case, we will never know. So, tough luck for that. Now, the king couldn't figure out exactly how he would manage all of that and muster all the money that was necessary to go, and he had friends in well, it wasn't called UK in those times, but Britain, I guess. He decided that he had to give some reward to his friends and keep people happy. So he supported the creation of something called the Hudson Bay Company. That's an interesting story that is very well related to the Canadian situation and what we live today. The Hudson Bay Company, basically, if you look at that first, well, wrote that point, reached eventually that side. So eventually, the Hudson Bay Company was owning 12% of the landmass of the world, mainly Canada. So that's a kind of nice gift, and they had every right. They could hang people, they had their own police, their own law, they could collect levy, they could do all of those things, including, of course, kicking indigenous people out of their land and taking all necessary measures to make sure they would make all the money necessarily out of it. So that's the Hudson Bay Company. But that brought a situation that is today, in 2020, and you'll see, I'll connect later, but in today, well, that was the last land census, you say? People looking to the title and what's not. So in today's situation, we live in a society, in a country, where only 9% of the land in Canada is actually owned privately. 9%. 91% of the land in Canada is either owned or controlled through different level of government, through different level of collective institutions such as churches, community organization, public institution. We, through all those structures that are collective owned, we own 91% of the land. Yet we are being told that the rule of market apply everywhere. I'm saying, what a strange statement. They own 9% of the land, but they rule 100% of the land, it seems. So where's the connection? There's something I'm missing in the link there. So, and well, you're gonna say, yeah, of course, it's 91% because it's up north in those places where nobody lives. Oops. It's that place where only indigenous people live, and it's not so important that, who owns it and who not, because we always manage to deal it the way we want. So I'm saying, let's think a little bit better. Urban land, so Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Sherbrooke, whatever city you want to talk about, on average, 65% of the space in urban land is actually collectively owned. 65%. So that includes the roads, the sidewalk, the institution, the park, and so on. that is 65% of the land. And privately owned, where there's 14, I made a list, there's 14 non-market collective structure that own lands in urban area. So, no, well, here's the list. Railway, yeah, green space, stadium, arena, churches, public institution, public and community housing. Together, we're 65%. And 35% is from the private. So even in urban settlement, even where it's high density, private for profit only control, truly, 35% of the land. And yet, we accept to have them ruling the way we manage between ourselves. Well, there must be something wrong, again, in that concept. They don't own, I mean, we are being told constantly that this is how things are being managed. This is the only way we can do it. But the reality is actually, even after 500 years of developing the concept of private ownership in Canada, they still own only 9% and 35% in urban space, which is the highest level. So there's something there that we could do a bit differently, I beg to think. So, but is it only the land? Well, no. There's all kind of agreement that says actually, in Canada, all the air belong to the government. You can't build higher than something, and the government is issuing license for airline company, is the government that's managing all of that, and you need permission to use it. Even the wave that we use for our cell phone and so on, government put auction regularly to sell the airwave. So we own that collectively already. Mining rights, everything that in Canada, everything that is below a certain level, if I well remember, is about 10 meters deep. All of that, it's collective ownership. Even if you own the title on the land, what's below that title is collectively owned. So it's even that 35% or that 9% is still being owned by the collectivity. How about the planet? Well, 66% of the planet is seawater, and there's an international law that says, you know, except for coastal area, which is a small slice of about 200K around the continent, all of that is collectively owned by the humanity. There's no state that has the authority to say that piece of sea belongs to me. So basically, there's something bizarre in that situation, because we have that first king that give the George III, that give the Hudson Bay Company the right to own everything. And, oh, this is a thing I forgot in my presentation. Well, no problem. We'll see it now. How did it go from the Hudson Bay Company to being, because, I mean, they own the land. You saw the map. Well, one of the first law voted by the Canadian government, these people that make the law, was actually an expropriation of the Hudson Bay Company. Canada public land today is public because the Canadian government, after the British state gave it to the Hudson Bay, but the Canadian government expropriate the Hudson Bay Company. So this is important to understand, because when we're being told that, well, they own it and this is a rule and everything, I'm saying there's nothing more fundamental in the Constitution of Canada as it is today than, beside the fact that we stole the land from the indigenous people, but once it was in the realm of today's legal structure, we bought it. The Canadian government took action and did the largest nationalization of any capitalist country in the history. This is the Canadian government. So when they're telling us, no, here, this is not how it works, the state can't do it. No, Canada was built on that concept that we are going to expropriate a private owner. So don't tell me it's not a Canadian way of doing things. There's nothing more Canadian than what we're saying. We gotta own that land. We did it. And now we're giving it back to the private for-profit market? Where is that coming from? Who thought about that? I mean, what kind of narrative did they develop that we buy in that story? I mean, those are actually all facts. It's easy. You turn the page in the Canadian government gazette, and you'll see all those transactions. They're there. But we think like it doesn't exist. Well, it does exist. I'm sorry. So 9%, the whole story, 65%, the land. Whoa! They're telling us We don't have the money to do anything. It's too complicated. Legal restriction, rules. I dare to challenge that. I'm saying they come from a society and an institution that did the expropriation. They come from an institution that took the decision to steal the land from the government, from the indigenous people, and expropriate private ownership on a large scale, on the largest scale ever happened in the capitalist world in history. So don't tell us we don't have the money. Don't tell us we don't have the right. Don't tell us the rule prevent. It is not true. We have all of that, and we can do all of that. Now, let's say we can't convince them. No, we don't say that. We will convince them. But how much for that piece of land? I mean, basically, a piece of land, a square foot of land is a square foot of land is a square foot of land. Therefore, a square foot of land is the same whether it's downtown Toronto or in some smaller community up north or no. We all know that it's not the same value that we give to a square foot of land. So it's not true. So it's not the intrinsic value of the land that we're buying when we're buying a piece of land. What we are buying in a piece of land, what define the rule around the value of a piece of land is the supply is a key element. Someone transformed my language a couple of months ago and told me, yeah, I understand now. Baby Jesus, for the last 3 billion years, didn't create a single square foot of land, extra square foot of land. So we have a limited supply. So I say, okay, we have let's take the analogy with baby Jesus. But anyway, the point is, the point is that the supply of land is fixed. Whatever the reason we can argue, it is there. There's no difference there. So we have a fixed supply and a demographic growth. So yes, it creates a pressure for more. The other thing is, how do we explain the roller coaster costs of housing? I mean, the same house in time is moving up and down. Now, we're being told today, oh, interest rate makes it, unaffordable today. Well, if one is looking to the different curves that are there, I did that presentation the last time in Alberta and didn't have time to change it with the data for coast to coast to coast, but trust me, coast to coast or Alberta, the data is literally the same. What we see there, those 3 curves, is about that. I challenge anyone to find a direct correlation between the demographic growth and the interest rate and the cost of housing. There is none. Sometimes the interest rate, you see on the left end of the chart, interest rate were in the roof, quote unquote, in 2008, and the price of houses were way below. Now, at the end, they're up, and in between, while the price went up when the interest rate went down. So there's no connection. It's not the key element that defines the average cost of the transaction. It might have an impact on the cost of doing a development, but it has no impact on the value of the good that you've been developing. This is not the key element. It's not the supply, it's not the demand, because you see the chart, there's no connection. So there's something else that must explain it. And, well, again, just to confirm the same story, the green line is the cost. The blue line is the interest rate. Actually, where the interest rate is the lower, you see an up in the cost of housing. So this is not the key element. Whatever they're telling us on radio and on TV and everywhere, this is not the key element that drives the thing. The key element that drives the thing, in my view, is infrastructure. What makes a piece of land more valuable than another piece of land is the fact that you access it easily. Is there a highway? Is there a road? Is there a railroad? Is there something to get there? Is there a school nearby? Is there a water system? Is there electricity? Is there all of those things that make that you can use a piece of land and make a benefit for yourself or as a collectivity? The infrastructure is a key element that changes the value of a piece of land locally. And infrastructure are not done by individual. Infrastructure are collective investment. And it is that collective investment that makes that the piece of land in the city where I was born, Chicoutimi, is worth way less than a piece of land where I live today in Montreal. Because in Montreal, we got all those infrastructure, and in Chicoutimi, we got not none, but very way less, let's say, infrastructure. So that's the key difference. And that's something that is being generated by the different infrastructure in all, the road, the church, whatever, all those things, the school, hospital that we develop collectively. So that's bring the thing. And now to the value of land. Now, I've been talking, and you say, what the hell is he talking about? What does he know about that? He's not an economist. Well, let's go to the economist. Actually, the guy that is seen as the first scientific economist in history, Adam Smith, that defined the rules of capitalism and said how the economy worked in the capitalist world. And so I'm quoting him. The rent of land, therefore, considered as a price paid for the use of the land, is naturally a monopoly price. It is not at all proportional to what the landlord may have laid out upon the improvement of the land or to what he can afford to take, but to what the farmer can afford to give. So it's not what you put. I mean, there's the issue of infrastructure that give a collective value. But what defines the final price of the piece of land is the capacity to pay. This is why, for example, when the government is subsidizing cost of construction, for example, it's doing things, the people who are selling the house are selling it to the price a buyer is willing to pay for it. It's not what you invest in it. I mean, we all seen in 2008 what happened in the state. Tons of houses that were selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars. 3 weeks later, they were selling for hundreds of dollars, literally. What happened? Is this that the 2x4 costs went down? No. What made the difference? That people had lost the capacity to buy it. So anyway, so that's Mr. Smith that defined what's the maximum cost you can have. Now that brings two concepts that are quite often mixed, and I'd like to use the opportunity to clarify the distinction between the two. Commodification. So commodification is seeing a house not as something that you live in, not as something that answers the needs of people, but as something you sell and buy and make profit out of. So the most spectacular example of the commodification is the REITs, that real estate investment trust that buy and sell houses by the tens of thousands every day. And they make money and they lose money, but it has nothing to do with the value. And it's also true for individual. I remember my father, when he bought a house, literally, his main interest was, will my family be safe? Is it going to be a safe harbor for my family? Now when people are buying a house, they say, oh, is that going to be good for my retirement plan? I'm buying my retirement plan when I buy a house. I'm not buying security for my family. And that makes a big difference in the way we see and the way we market the house. Now, the other concept that is mixed often with commodification is financialization. Quite often people use both words saying equivalent. No. The difference is the other one is buying and selling something like a good. Financialization is people who use the market. Whoops, too fast. We use the market to launder money, to do all kind of not nice thing. And in Canada, we are actually a safe haven for that. A lot of the money laundering that is happening in Canada is happening through those transactions. These guys don't give a damn, because I'm on stage, I'm going to try to keep being polite. These guys don't give a damn about the price. Actually, the higher the price, the happier they are, because they are laundering a higher amount of money. So they're actually buying and selling to themselves. They create shell corporations that are buying and selling, buying and selling, buying and selling, inflating the general costs. They don't give a damn about what's happening in the rest of society and what's the impact of that. They do that because they launder money from the drug traffic, from the gun traffic, from the human trafficking, and other nice activities. So there's a difference there. Some players are on both sides of the fence. This is why I put BlackRock, because I really hate them. But basically, in theory, two different kind of people. Summary number 3, therefore. So there's a fixed supply of land. Price is not connected to interest rate. It's not connected to location. It's connected to the infrastructure. Some people are doing commodification, which has an impact on the price. Other people are doing financialization, which also has impact on the price. That creates a crisis, and that crisis, there's put some people in a kind of, what do I do? Well, there's him, but there is an answer. So that's basically any way out of that mess. Oh, what's the time? Can I fix the mess? Oh, yes, we still have a few minutes. I'll go fast. So turning the tide, what can we do? Well, first we have to assume our own responsibility as a sector. As a not-for-profit, co-op, land trust, yes, we have to be vigilant and ask and pressurize government to the maximum of our capacity to chip in and to provide all they can, and everything we can suck out of them need to be sucked up to the last drop. I'm very clear on that. But the point is, unless we manage to get a complete social transformation of the society, there will be a cap to what we can suck out of them. And in today's world, the development of the land trust, of the co-op, of the not-for-profit is actually being hampered by the way their program is being developed. And we, over the year, develop an attitude saying, well, if we don't have the money from the government, therefore we can't do anything. It's a very prevalent position in the community housing sector altogether. I'm saying we can do differently. And I insist on the fact that it's not to get the government off the hook, but we can act because we have now, which we didn't, but we have now our own equity. We now have all kind of things that makes it different. So without getting too much into detail because of time, we can proceed and push for decommodification of the land. So decoupling of land and building ownership, because it's two different concepts. In land trust, we understand that very well usually. And we got to start collecting the rent and taking back the 9%. That's the general plan. Now, each of those things requires something to be implemented. So what does it mean, assuming our responsibility as a sector? Well, leverage our asset. In Canada today, we have approximately $60 billion worth of asset collectively. Co-op, not-for-profit, land trust, $60 billion. Well, this is quite a load of money. And we do very little with it. So we got to learn and fight to own, because we're all encumbered by many government regulations, among other things. We got to learn to use that money, use that leverage that we have that we're not using actually. We got to develop a sustainable business model. Well, you remember at the beginning of my presentation with the middle. So we got to have something that when we build and when we develop, have a long-term vision of what we're doing, and saying the important is to increase our presence in the market. Even if the first day we can't provide as affordable as we would love to, all the unit, owning it makes it that it will become affordable with time, and we still have to pressurize the government so they can help the tenants that will be, or the tenants in our building will be able to afford the unit that we are in. But we got to open our vision about who we want to accommodate in our places. Well, that goes with going from disenfranchised focus to community focus. This is what I was saying. It's not because if a project is not able to meet our initial objective, but that project can be financially viable, as a sector, our responsibility is to implement that project. We will bring the affordability over time. But if we don't buy it today, if we don't build it today, and we wait for the government to give us the money, well, we'll wait for a long time. In French, we say, tu vas attendre Godot. So, en attendant Godot, we will do something that is different, and we'll buy it today because we know that in 15 years, it will be a great asset for the community, even if today doesn't achieve everything we want to do. And then we will, in our relationship with government, stop being cheap labor. We implement things that make no sense, at condition that makes no sense, and we'll be the leader of the thing. So we don't let them rules. We take the lead, and we decide the rule of engagement, and we fight with them on that as well. So decommodification of the land, no more privatization. Every land transfer should be done to a communal or community use only and at no cost. Any land that is belonging to any state level of government, school board, whatever, name it, all of those things, not a penny for any of those pieces of land, and should be necessarily transferred to a land trust or a community organization of some sort. Decoupling land and building ownership. Well, instead of giving the right forever to someone through buying the land, and we saw that the land value is not associated with so much what you do on it. It's associated with all kinds of things that have nothing to do with you as a landowner. It's the infrastructure. It's all those things that are collective that give the value to the land. Therefore, you shouldn't own the land. We should have a structure that makes it that according to whatever is being developed on that piece of land, we as a community have a right to reset. Not every 3 weeks or every 3 months or every 3 years, but over, it could be depending on what is being built and what is being planned. No, 5 years, 10 years, 35 years, 50 years, 100 years, maybe. But as a community, we should be able, because we want nobody to own the land, but the use of the land has a value. So they should pay a rent instead of paying the buying of the land. So, and then we reset whenever we're not happy about what they've done on it. So if they build a shopping mall, we're happy. When the shopping mall is not good, we take that away. So lease that match use, so that brings all kind of nice things because we're in a hurry. We go over very fast. So basically, collecting the rent. What's the impact of collecting the rent instead of selling? If we collect the rent, it makes sense. If we're selling, then the expectation is that the one who bought will resell at a higher price. And that has a name. It's called a Ponzi scheme. So the whole housing market in this country is built on housing, a Ponzi scheme. And if we don't want to bring the whole country and the people who are part of the scheme today to bankruptcy and crisis, which is happening today as we speak, then we got to change that rule. So, and that generate, through renting the land, that generate a return that we can do for community investment. Because now, once the land is being sold by a government, it's used once. After that, the government, or collectively, would it be the government or land trust or something, doesn't have any income generated for it. So we need to have a capacity to keep a sustainable income coming to making as possible. So basically, taking back the 9% from the different agencies, us, everything should be mobilized with that objective. So at the end of the day, what's happening? 100%, yay! So in conclusion, you might recognize the picture. It was the first time I gave that presentation. It was the fight by the Wet'suwet'en people against and the whole economy of Canada was on the verge of bankruptcy because one railway was closed. 3 months later, there was a pandemic, no problem. Everything was closed, but we would survive. Now, that one was very interesting at that point. Anyway, so by forcing outside of the law those refusing to acknowledge his so-called natural right to own the land, the price has only one goal. That is to prevent the collapse of the apparatus that makes him the prince, and entitle him to abuse us all. So on those, I don't know if they're good or bad words, but on those words, thank you very much. Is there any question? Yeah. Just for I was sitting there, so I know we won't hear it. Number 5. Keep speaking.
Hello?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah, thank you for that. That was incredible. On your point about infrastructure and its relationship to the asset prices, I'm just really curious. In the kind of the Georges model, there's the land value capture kind of tax, and I'm wondering, one, I haven't really been able to understand quite what this is, and I figure I might ask you since you quoted Adam Smith and a lot of all these other folks, but also if that could be leveraged for community land trust financing.
Absolutely. For example, right now I'm working in collaboration with, there's in Montreal, there's a place that used to be a racetrack called Blue Bonnets, that now they're trying to, so we're working with the La Table de Quartier, whatever I don't know how to translate that, but the neighborhood association, about doing the development, and we have actually a real fight with the governments and the other partner on the table about the fact that instead of just looking to the land, splitting it in 18 different pieces and saying everyone build whatever they want to build on it, we should have a cohesive vision, not only for good urban planning purpose, but also because it makes more sense. So for example, and I've seen those examples recently, including, well, Tom was there, in Scotland, where they've established energy generation plant, or heat generation plant, that is centralized, that is providing for literally 12,000 units of housing that bring down the costs of that rather than doing it individually. I was seeing recently something very spectacular. I don't have time to get into detail, but for example, in Vienna now, they don't build parking under any building anymore when they do large development. They have developed a very good formula that reduces the implantation size of the roads and the need for parking space instead of having everyone underground parking, you mobilize it in one place and you generate revenue out of that. There's tons of examples of things that could be made in terms of developing our own infrastructure, that we own the infrastructure and we save money and actually can generate money. For example, in Canada, we pay huge costs for internet and everything. There's community, there's full village, only village, I don't know why we don't do that in big cities, but there's full village who manage to have one internet connection that is owned by a community entity, and everyone is having top-notch internet services at a quarter of the price that if you go with Bell or Roger or whatever other provider. So there's all kind of infrastructure we can develop that way that would both generate infrastructure and generate a regular income that help do more development, both in terms of economic development, but housing development and all kind of things like that. Yep.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear what for you are the most inspiring projects happening at the moment in Canada?
I won't answer really the question the way you ask it, because I don't pretend to know everything that is happening in Canada, so it would be unfair. I probably missed the best one. So I'm not going to say that. But I would say the best one is here today. There's people who are willing to mobilize, to work, to campaign, and to act. This is what makes the difference. And I was listening to the presentation earlier today. There's a growth. And in the community housing sector altogether, co-op, not-for-profit, there's also many players that are eagerly fighting, doing fantastic things. I'm seeing Tom's at the back of the store, the room here, where they do a lot of things at BC's, CHFBC. There's something, sorry, I don't want to raise my flag, but the center is working very hard in Quebec in developing something called Plancher. There's all kind of initiatives that are going forward, and I believe that this is the right spirit. Now, we have to break the intellectual and emotional concept that we are limited by the government capacity to contribute to us. This is, I don't know what's the best answer, but what I know is the biggest challenge we have. So the community and the organization that will emancipate itself from the belief that we can't do nothing without the government is the one that's going to win. For me, that's very clear. Again, it doesn't mean that they don't have to contribute. What I'm saying is that we don't have to give them the rein. We got to do the fight, and one of the part of the fight is say we want to be in control. We don't want your cheap labor. We want to be master of our own destiny.
Hello? Okay. Through the Community Housing Transformation Center, I suppose you have some form of access to government?
Well,
like you interact with the government, different levels of government, I suppose?
Yes.
What is the response, at CMHC or other agencies that would fund this type or would invest in this type of work? When you share this analysis, like, is there alignment ever? What are the alignment points are there points of alignment, and could you share them with us so we can get the benefit of that? Because I think many of us are, find your narrative compelling. Of course, we wonder, like, who else does? And could you share that with us? Yeah.
Yes. Interestingly enough, there's a wide range of, it's not a monolithic answer. So that's by itself a good answer, because if it was monolithic, it would be all against us. So it's good. There's some crack here and there. We can do something out. The weirdest response I had was from a municipality that when I explained the concept, I don't do that presentation to them because it's just a little bit over the edge, I believe, for them. But when I still argue with the way to do things, finally there was a senior official who said, yes, now I understand. So you mean value of homes and building won't increase year over year? And I say, well, they might increase if you do investment on it, but there won't be a speculative spin on it. Yeah, but it was a city official. He said, yes, but our tax base, our income is based on the fact that we collect based on the value of the buildings and the land. So if you stop that, you're telling us that the budget of the city will be freeze. We can't have that. Well, that's a real answer, but maybe the problem is the way taxation is being defined rather than refusing to have something. So it goes to that end for those who understand. A lot of people, honestly, don't grasp the concept. They have a lot of difficulties figuring it out. And then there was that. But there's also people, and I would say these days, mainly at the federal government, with times it differ, the context. But nowadays, at the federal government level, they are under such pressure that even what they would have considered completely crazy 2 or 3 years ago, they're willing to listen to you today. And they're willing to see what's possible to do. Of course, they're probably not willing to go to 20%, but helping us move from 3.5% to 4 or 5 or 6%, that's the kind of thing they might be willing to think of.
Hi. You spoke a little bit about air rights and that being controlled by the government or in the public purview. My question is in relation to, and someone touched on it with LVTs, which is a levy on land. What we're seeing a lot more across cities is the use of air parcel or air rights above buildings. I wonder what your thoughts are on that, because that wouldn't really fall under LVTs or that sort of levy. But what we're seeing a lot of, I'm from Vancouver, we're seeing public entities, infrastructure entities like TransLink, which is public, now getting into housing development. And what we're seeing is a lean towards for-profit. And then those air parcel rights are being sold off to for-profit entities and not so much being maintained within the realm of a public use or a public right. So I'd like to hear a little more about that.
Bad, but not you, them. So let's be clear. Somewhere in my presentation, I said all piece of land should be transferred at zero cost to a community control that is not aimed at making profit. So this is exactly opposite to what I was talking about. And would it be land right or air right? For me, it's conceptually the same thing. So it's just layers of ownership instead of just being one layer. You had a second or third layer of ownership. But still, the point is that if you want to pursue a social purpose, which is have it more densified, more ecologic space, and so on, it makes no sense to put a tax on that, or the tax maybe as a form of rent that you collect, but to sell it, again, the concept that you shouldn't sell it to anyone. You should rent that space upon the basis that you will do a project that is socially useful, that will improve the quality of life of the population, current and future. So no, they shouldn't do that. And I would say in Montreal, they do the same thing with the REM, and they do the same thing all over I know in Ottawa, they're doing it also, and so on. So it's not, they just manage the air rights like they manage the land rights. So they manage it as bad, up or down.
I think the session's just about over, but I'm going to ask one last question, just because I'm curious for your opinion. We have a local councillor and some other folks in the city who are, in Toronto at least, talking about creating a new public developer of rental housing. And I'm wondering for your thoughts on that. Maybe not just based on this presentation, but the center's view on that. Like, is that a good idea in this
sorry,
moment?
I'm not
Like,
sure. What does he want to do?
create new corporations that will develop rental housing that are owned by municipalities.
Well, it's there's pros and cons. Obviously, the pros is that it's easier for government to give himself money, and they're not scared of losing control. Its cons is that we know they do lose control, and when they lose control, you end up with public housing stock like we have. It is badly maintained. They sell assets, and they do all kind of thing like that. So I would say maybe one of the answer could be joint venture and partnership, where they don't just rule by themselves. There's a community, a real check and balance process that involves other players in the community that prevent the whim of going from one leader to another leader at government level, and then the policy change completely. No, real estate is a long-term game, and we need to have consistency, and we have to have people who manage it properly. So if this is a compromise that we need to do to have the government on board, yes, but not for having them 100% control. That would be problematic in my view. On that, I'm sorry I've got to go, but thank you very much for your attention.